A happy Tuesday. It's both the happiest and the saddest day of the national basketball season, day after the tournament, which means everything's done, but it is the day after the tournament. We're here with our Chalkcast. We're going to talk about that final game as well as Saturday night's semifinals. We'll get in a little bit of the AP Coach and Player of the Year, but first we got to say good morning to Coach Reaker, Jim Reaker, here on our Chalkcast, two really old guys with Jeff Zink. How you doing today, Coach? Probably stayed up a little late watching the end of that game, didn't you?
Yeah, a little sleepy. That would be one of my recommendations. Maybe they could have started that game an hour earlier, you know. We got a lot of young fans that go to school, but I know it was out west. So, and it's all about TV and the money, but they ought to think about the East Coast a little bit.
They say the same thing around Super Bowl and World Series time, but money rules the day. Got to get it in prime time in the West, no matter where it is. Well, we got to see a lively one, and we'll be getting to that in just a little bit, and what ended up, a great year, the two number one seeds there. But before we get to that news, we'll talk very briefly about two news that came out. We talked a little bit about early in the year. The AP comes out and names their Player of the Year, and it's Frank Mason of Kansas. He got 37 of the 65 votes, followed by Josh Hart, Caleb Swanigan, and then Lonzo Ball with 3. And we just go very quickly to you, Jim, and say, are you all right with Frank Mason being, I'm sure you're okay with it, but do you think maybe there was a better candidate out there or somebody that deserved a little more recognition in that top 4?
Well, here's my rankings. I gave Luke Kennard and Nigel Williams-Goss honorable mention. My number 5 I had would be Josh Hart, how he led the Villanova Wildcats to another very, very successful season, even though they got knocked out of the tournament a little bit early. Number 4, Lonzo Ball is what I had. He did so many things for the UCLA Bruins, helped them come back. Number 3, a young man we saw last night gutting it out and being named the most valuable player of the final game, or the Final Four there, Joel Berry of North Carolina. Number 2, I have Caleb Swanigan. I believe Biggie Swanigan, he averaged a double-double this year and probably put up some of the most impressive numbers for a big man, but also could shoot a little bit outside. And if I'm starting a pro team, I might start with him. But no, Frank Mason, I don't have a problem with him being Player of the Year. Got him at the top of my list also.
Yeah. Well, fantastic job there at Kansas. Of course, some people do squawk a little bit with his off-the-court issues, but that should take nothing away from what he did on the court. And the surprise of that is that in the 50, I think this is the 51st year of the AP naming a Player of the Year, that he's the first player from Kansas to win the award. So their great history, they're finally going to get somebody in there. And I'm with you. There were several fantastic candidates you could have named, and you only get to name one. So we're going to congratulate Frank and move on to the Coach of the Year, who was Mark Few of Gonzaga. He got, again, like Mason, got 37 of 65 votes, followed by Sean Miller, Chris Collins, Tim Yankovic. And I guess the question always is with this, first of all, it's Coach Few's first win, which is kind of surprising. The third youngest guy to get to 500 wins. He's been out there. So was it more, not to take away from the year they had, because they had a fantastic year, and we should preface this, folks, that they have to vote on this award much like Major League MVP and NFL Player of the Year things before the tournament begins. So it's not based upon anybody's tournament performance. But is this more of a accumulation over time? We've overlooked Mark Few, so let's give it to him now. One of those other coaches had the better year in there.
Yeah, Coach of the Year is always tough because, it's what the coach is dealing with as far as talent and players that he has that year and what kind of job he does. I kind of ranked them. Honorable mention I gave to Richard Pitino up at Minnesota, what he did turning that program around. I think it was one of the top programs turning losses into victories. Also, Scott Drew down at Baylor, and that's kind of, he's year in and year out, starting to put a quality team out there. Number 5, and again, any of these could have been number 1, I think. Jay Wright did an outstanding job again at Villanova. Chris Holtman at Butler, the job he did, nothing much expected. I think they were voted maybe 7th in the Big East in preseason, and of course they finished 2nd and defeated the Villanova Wildcats twice in league play. So I have to give him some mention. Number 3, I have Steve Alford for, again, the job he did out at UCLA, turning things around. Again, another big win total turnaround for the Bruins. Number 2, I go with Chris Collins. I mean, talk about what he has done at Northwestern, a place that has led to a lot of non-success for many coaches, and he, of course, got them into the tournament for the first time. I believe they finished 3rd or 4th in the Big Ten. So great season for him. But, yeah, Mark Few deserves the award. And is it a culmination of 18 years? I couldn't believe it's been 18 years that he's been there. It doesn't seem that long. But, yeah, very deserving. And if you saw the interviews with him after the game last night, just a class act. He gets it. He sees the big picture. He understands what it's all about. And so very deserving of the award, Mark Few of Gonzaga. I got to get that right. You know, I think the people out there, it's kind of like Xavier, the people that used to call him Egg Xavier. I bet the people out there don't like it when we say Gonzaga instead of Gonzaga. So I'm going to practice that all summer because I think there'll be a player next year again in the NCAA. So we'll give our kudos to the Zags and Mark Few.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm going to first one. I'll say I think they're okay. It came out this week that their merchandise sales are up well over 1,000%. So they'll have a couple money, maybe a couple of bucks to buy a publicity person out there to get the proper pronunciation out there. I've got no problem with any of the guys that you mentioned. You know, I would throw in there the coach that I've lauded quite a bit, Sean Miller. You know, he did lose to Xavier there in the Sweet 16, but bringing that team together with losing players to injury and suspension and going off to the pros and still had them right where they wanted to be and could have been even higher. And somebody else I mentioned a couple times, which is Tim Yankovich at SMU. He only got 3 votes, but that's a guy that they're going to have to decide. They're taking over for the legend Larry Brown in a probationary sort of period. They were on the downswing, and he got them pretty far. It's just a matter of getting the publicity in that American Athletic Conference. But, you know, if Gonzaga can overcome it in the West Coast Conference, they probably can too, or you might see Coach Yankovich moving to a bigger program in the next couple of years. But certainly got to give it to Mark Few. 18 years, you're surprised that he didn't get it before, but he'd be the first one to say that he doesn't care about things like that. It was more important for him to get those kids into the Final Four and into the final game, and we'll be talking more about all that in just a little bit. But before we get to that, let's talk about the games that got us to the final game. So on Saturday we had South Carolina versus Gonzaga and Oregon versus UNC, and the games were kind of a mirror image of each other. You know, both favorite teams pulled way ahead. I think UNC was up by 12 at one point to Oregon, and Gonzaga was up by 14 to South Carolina. But then the underdog came climbing back, and they both went down to the last minute. And regardless of last night's game and all that people are thinking about now, don't forget it was just Saturday ago. So do we have the right teams in that championship game last night?
Oh yeah, I believe so. And what a Final Four, but what a tournament overall. But the Final Four, all 3 games were decided within the last couple minutes, if not minute. Yeah, again, there were big swings back and forth in all 3 games. I wonder sometimes if that's not attributed to the setting that they're playing in. You know, now that they play them in big stadiums, sometimes I think that leads to maybe some of the sloppy play and errant shots we see. And again, you're playing in front of what I think they said 77,000 people last night. If you're going to be nervous, that might be it. And another how many million watching on TV. So you are on the big stage. Might lead to some of the sloppy play. But despite some of the sloppy play we saw, it was exciting. All of them went right down to the wire, and I believe the two best teams, at least out of the Final Four, played last night. Of course, you could make arguments that maybe Kentucky or Kansas in that Final Four would have made it a stronger Final Four. But I like the fact that Gonzaga, the Zags, did make it to the final game. They didn't quite get it done, but, this kind of mirrors the Xavier program that we kind of follow here in Cincinnati that has just worked over the years to get a little bit better and go a little bit farther and continues to climb that mountain, so to speak. So great game for them. But, of course, as sometimes often happens in NCAA basketball, the Blue Bloods come through. And, of course, North Carolina with Roy Williams won their fifth overall and his third. And so, one of the programs that we expect to be there and possibly win it. And, of course, the other big story I think that has been out there and is a great story is the fact that this was what they called the Redemption Tour. And said it started almost this day last year after that heartbreaking defeat that they suffered to Villanova in on the final shot at the buzzer. In last year's final, they worked all the way back and used that as motivation to get back to that game. And, of course, finished business last night and brought home the national championship.
Well, you jumped right ahead then to the final game, so I'll just give a couple of thoughts there on the semifinal, which was the topic at hand. And I know that's kind of why we put that in there because the semifinals kind of get skipped and it was the right team in there. But lots of great play in there. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that South Carolina came battling back from 9 down. The two best defensive teams in the nation, yet both ended up scoring in the 70s, which tells you just what happens in tournament play. But some great play by the Gamecocks with them spreading the scoring. They had 4 guys score in double digits. P.J. Dozier came up big for them. Sindarius Thornwell, coming back from the flu, had a terrible first half, but then helped lead that charge back for the Gamecocks in the second half. And Silva pulling down 13 rebounds, which kept them in that. So it was sort of a punching back and forth, and then they weren't going away. And it went down to those into the last minute where it looked like the Gamecocks could pull it out. But got to give kudos to Frank Martin and the squad. And you're right, even Coach Altman out there in Oregon, they watched their hopes go away on what was probably, to me, one of the goofiest endings because you had, the strategy, the old Jim Valvano strategy of sending them to the line was working because Oregon got them to the line and got them missing. And North Carolina is usually a pretty good free throw team up until that last couple of minutes. Both teams were hitting it like an 85% in the free throws, but then North Carolina missing 4 of their last 5. But unfortunately, the Ducks couldn't get that last rebound. So lots of things there. Unfortunately, Bell from Oregon blamed himself for not getting that, but he can't do it. I mean, he had 16 boards on the day. Again, they had 4 guys in double digits. Dylan Brooks goes out. They kind of shut him down a little bit, but Dorsey and Ennis picked up the slack. And Dorsey 12 from 12 from the line for them, and the Ducks hit their throws. They were 25 for 28, so did a great job there, even though it was sloppy towards the end. So those two exciting things set up the excitement of last night. So let's we go to last night. A couple of things that we start right off. Talking about free throws, it was a herky-jerky game because so many fouls were called until about the last 5 minutes. So, my question to you would be, great game, don't want to take away from Coach Williams' victory, like you say, or even the class that Mark Few and his guys exhibited. But might this have been a different game had the referees kept the P in the whistle just a little bit?
Well, that's really hard to say. And, they have a hard job because really don't want that to be a factor in the game. But, the reality is it is part of the game, and, they just can't let everything go. It's hard to say how that changed the game. And Roy Williams even said that they didn't feel like they played their best game. He didn't feel like either team played their best game. But when he called that last timeout, he urged his players that they had to play the best last 3 minutes, and he thought they did do that and actually came up with some big plays. And again, and just one note back on the semifinal game where Oregon couldn't get the rebound. I think it was Dylan Brooks who actually didn't block out. It was very evident. But part of that, I think, is just the nature of the game. These guys are going full bore for 40 minutes, and sometimes the physical and then even the mental fatigue takes over at the end, and the shots fall a little short, or you forget to do a basic thing that you've been doing all year, is boxing out when you have the advantage there on the free throw line. So again, it wasn't the prettiest, but you could not fault effort on either side. You saw Nigel Williams-Goss, who I think probably has a pretty severely sprained ankle there that happened near the end of the game, and he tried to play through it. And, of course, he had that last shot trying to get the Zags back in it and came up a little bit short and probably was limited. But, the effort and, just both teams giving it their all, you had to appreciate that, the beauty of competition.
Yeah, I'm looking at it could be that the angles were an issue on both sides. Barry had a chance to get his work done, and he played through the pain. Like I say, getting the award there at the end, and he had a rough first half and came back strong in the second half. Ended up shooting 7 for 19, getting 22 points to lead them, and then that unfortunate ankle turn of Williams-Goss, which did limit him just in the last couple of minutes because he had put that team on his shoulder with some circus shots and some three-pointers that said, they weren't going anywhere, and probably couldn't get the height that he wanted to on that last shot. And unfortunately, Collins on the bench having already fouled out, and Karniski and Williams having to play with 4 for almost 10 minutes of that second half might have changed a couple things. In addition to the fact that, Karnowski had that flagrant call on him, which I didn't understand. Luckily, it didn't turn things too deeply because Carolina missed both of their free throws on that. But again, having to go to the video to decide if it was a flagrant and just trying to keep the ball going. So a lot of things there on the sloppiness, but it doesn't take away from, like you say, the heart and soul of these guys that fought hard to the end. And as often happens, either team could have won. And what you mentioned about the Tar Heels was we talked about last week. I mean, it was just as likely for them to come back and repeat, which was just 3 times, as it had to be a team that got to the Final Four twice and lost in the past 30-plus years. We mentioned the 3 times that somebody came back. That was North Carolina coming back in 82 after having lost to Bobby Knight in 81. Duke did it right before their repeat years. They lost in the 90 to the Jerry Tarkanian UNLV squad, and then came back to win. And then, of course, Kentucky, after Rick Pitino left, came back with Tubby Smith. But when you look back, I'm glad they sort of got the redemption and made that the 4th time, because it could have been Butler, which lost twice in 10 and 11, or going back to Michigan, the Fab Five, which lost twice in the 90s. You got Houston, which got there two straight games and lost, of course, the heartbreaker, Jimmy Valvano, and then the next year to John Thompson and the Hoyas. And you've got to go back into the early 1960s to see when that had happened again, when Ohio State got there twice. So very delicate situation for Roy Williams, and he kept them on track. But after that heartbreaking last-second loss, and it can go either way, but you could see that them shine through. And I think the person that they need to talk about a little bit, as I put in here, did the Meeks inherit the earth? Because we talked about, was it going to be the Stars or the Subs? And in both the semifinal and the the final game, Kennedy Meeks came up strong to support the people that we talk about a little more for the Tar Heels to pull out that win.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said there. And again, it's one shining moment. Had to watch that. Has become kind of a tradition. And of course, it was kind of fun to see the Musketeers in there a few times shown. So great game.
Yeah. All right, so that brings a wrap, and congratulations to Roy Williams getting his third. Mark Few's going to have his group back, and who's going to be the breakthrough stars next year? Will Xavier get into their first Final Four and make Jim's life happy and figure out how to get out to the Final Four, or will it be somebody like Greg Marshall bringing Wichita State back, or Jankovic? You just never know. So let's look forward a little bit to 2017. We started this year the tournament, and we both had the opinion that we thought it would be junior or senior leadership that led the teams to the end, and that turned out to be the case really with all four Final Four teams, more than the one and done. The first thing I'd say to you in the year that we started off calling the year of the freshmen, does the fact that it's the people that stay through a program and the leadership and building that team atmosphere, getting teams to the Final Four. And other than Calipari's group that won it a few years ago, just about every year it's like that. I mean, you could go back to like Carmelo Anthony leading a team like Syracuse, but it seems to me that the veterans get it done. Should this give kids and coaches pause about the whole one-and-done situation?
Well, that's a double-edged sword. And, if you're a coach, are you going to, not go after players who are probably only going to be in your program for 1 year, like, of course, John Calipari does it to the max? As a recruiter, you're always looking for the best players. But I like the fact that, what you just mentioned, it seems like year in and year out, it's the teams with the 4-year experience. Looking at North Carolina last night, two seniors, Meeks and Hicks, both making big plays down the final run there to win the game. And, of course, Barry and Jackson are juniors and have be their third year of experience. And you look over on the Zag side, Williams Goss is a junior, and Karneski, hopefully I said that right, is a senior. The only real one and done in that game last night maybe was the Collins boy from who was playing for Gonzaga. I heard this morning that he may declare. I'm not sure he's ready for the NBA, but I like the fact that it's the programs that put in the time over. You have players who do come back and they get an identity. And again, Kentucky does what they do, and of course Duke's gotten into it a little bit. I think it's the experience. When you get into on that big stage that I talked about, I think the experience plays out, and the fact that North Carolina was in that final game last year and lost it at the very end, I think gave them maybe the experience to get them over the hump in those last 3 minutes where they did outplay the Bulldogs from Gonzaga. So. Hey, I don't think anything's going to change. There's going to be the top 10 out there, and, Calipari's, I'm sure, has already got 3 or 4 of them signed and ready to go. But I like the way it works, and it makes it interesting.
And that's what's hard. As we look to 2017, it is way too early, but these things always happen. You got people like Giles leaving Duke, and Ball and Leaf have both decided to leave UCLA. Markkanen's declared at Zona, and looks like Alonzo Trier might do that. So 3-load situation. So who are we looking at as the early teams to watch? We started this year with Duke at the preseason number 1. Kentucky was up there. All these teams stayed strong. So the people picking these, they weren't that far off. Probably the only couple they missed was there was no mention of Baylor, and they had a fantastic year. SMU kind of came off, as I mentioned earlier. Nobody was looking at them. They ended up number 11 by the end of the year. So who are we looking at as, maybe the top teams to look at when we start up again in November?
Well, it's pretty easy. You just if you've been a college basketball fan, you say Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina. Be interesting to see what happens at Indiana with Archie Miller there now. UCLA out on the West Coast. Gonzaga will be, I'm sure, a formidable power again. Villanova, they're losing a couple players, but they still have some big names coming back. I'm sure they'll be forced to be reckoned with. It'll be the usual suspects, I believe. And, if you've been around college basketball, that's a pretty easy question to answer. You're not going to go wrong if you use those names. But, of course, the exciting part is, the teams that like the Baylors this year, who will be. And it's hard to say. A lot of it has to do with what happens between today and about the mid-November when, of course, we kick it off again and see what happens again.
Well, as we started this year, you never know with the coaching carousel who's going to add that little bit of a spark to a team. Georgetown announcing that they're going to hire alum Patrick Ewing, which you alluded to last week. We'll see what he can do. Archie Miller, a few movements there. Not as big of a year with movement as there was last year. A lot of things staying in place. ESPN and their top early, they got their top 5 and counting down. They got the Florida Gators at number 5. Mike White building on, it was another little bit of a surprise team. Then Villanova, followed by Patino's Cardinals, the Tar Heels, and it'd be fun to see if they can put it in position to repeat as Villanova put themselves in the position. And then they've got the Kentucky Wildcats as Calipari reloads. And CBS Sports was talking about the fact that they think that Duke and Arizona will be the 2 strongest teams come November. So, yeah, you're right. The Blue Bloods are out there. It's just a matter of how things mesh with the old heading out and the new coming in. But it was a fantastic year on many, many fronts, a good tournament, very exciting all the way down to the end. It's when you got 77,000 people watching it live and millions more across the country and even across the world, it makes for a fun night all the way around. So as we look at it, we're going to say goodbye to the 2016-17 year and wait for the 2017-18 year to begin. Congratulate Coach Williams again and Coach Few for getting their teams there, as well as Coach Martin and Altman for getting their teams to the Final Four, and all the coaches. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up for this season?
Well, maybe just one thought about that women's Final Four. How about that upset of UConn on Friday night by Mississippi State? The shot at the buzzer, again, all the emotion there. That was a great game and a great ending and brought a phenomenal streak to an end. But, a little bit different on that side that I think Mississippi State emotionally just spent themselves on Friday night and couldn't really compete with South Carolina on Sunday night for the final game. And then congratulations to South Carolina, their first national championship in women's. And, Frank Martin at South Carolina, another great story. Where will they be next year? But, look at them, two Final Four teams in a men's and women's. So lots of good things happening there. But, all great things must come to an end. And what was that streak, 113 or something like that? That's that one probably won't be eclipsed for quite a while.
Yeah, I was saving that for our ending, but you're right. That was a fantastic game, and it just goes to show you can be dominant all year, like Kentucky was a few years ago in the men's, and it just didn't happen. Anything can happen when you get it in the court, and a certain strategy, and having, like we talked last week, having that week to be able to prepare is something that coaches usually don't get throughout the season. And come tournament time, when you can just focus on one team and one game, it makes all the difference. But you got to give it to Dawn Staley and the Lady Gamecocks. Dawn is quite a story. If you ever look at that, she's been a power in women's basketball for a few decades now, just named the women's Olympic coach as well. And she's very much a class act, which is going to challenge Gino Oriyama and that UConn team for many years, as well as, Trish Van der Haar and the storied coaches that come out of that end that we don't always get a chance to talk about. So I'm with you there. Are we going to triviaize me today, or are we just going to wrap up the season and wait for November?
I got some trivia.
Oh, of course.
I'll give you a real simple softball, okay? Talking about the Final Four. Can you, off the top of your head, tell me where the Final Four will be played next year in 2018?
I don't even look that far ahead. I'm sure it's some big football stadium somewhere. I wasn't even listening for that. I was just focusing on the game, so that's not as big of a softball question as you might have thought. Where are they going to be?
2018 will be in the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas.
Yep, that's beautiful venue for a lot of things. I've said this before. I'm not a big fan of them playing in the football stadiums. I like the more intimate locations, but of course, when you can sell, like you did last night, 77,000 tickets versus selling 20, you're going to go for that. But the people of San Antonio will do a great job with it. It's a beautiful city, and we'll look forward to that. Who knows? Maybe your Muskies will be there, and you'll be there in person.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've never been to San Antonio, and I've heard it's a really nice city, so maybe I can put that on my two things on my bucket list there in one shot. And then just for fans down the road, then 19 will be played in Minneapolis, 20 in Atlanta, and both those the new football stadiums being built for those NFL franchises. And in 21, it will return very close to us here in Indianapolis at the Lucas Oil Arena. So that's the future mapped out. Now you want the tough trivia question, and this is just it's really tough, So I'll give it to you, but I don't expect you to get it correct.
Raise the bar high, Mr. Reaker.
I will. Hey, here we go. Who was the first person to use the term Final Four? When did it happen, and who was he referring to? Very difficult question.
Yes, it is.
Not a household name.
Yeah, I'm not even going to venture a guess. This is like your Cinderella and digging deep and all those things. I'm sure it goes back into the archives, so I'll just let you inform our fans of the etymology of the Final Four.
A man by the name of Ed, I'm not even sure how to pronounce this, Chay, Chay, or it might be Shay. He was a writer for the official Collegiate Basketball Guide of 1975, and he used the term to refer to Al McGuire and his Marquette Warriors that the year before they had reached the Final Four. First documented use of the word, and that was in 1975. Che was actually a writer. He was from Cleveland. He actually wrote for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, but was a contributing person on the official Collegiate Basketball Guide that year. And then in 1978 was the first time that the NCAA actually used the phrase Final Four in their publications, and of course they have the trademark on the name now, and so they are the owners, even though they weren't the ones to originally, to create the term. So just a little history on the Final Four there and where that name comes from.
That's a beautiful thing. You got to know the history and know things. Like you say, next year in San Antonio, a place that has hosted the Final Four twice. Maybe bring a little luck to Bill Self, because that's where he won his in Kansas, and the time before that, in 2008, was Jim Calhoun winning one at, I believe it was his second at Connecticut. So that it will take the Final Four, and of course that's morphed into many things. The ice hockey has the Frozen Four, all kinds of things that come from it. So any final thoughts other than the trivia, Jim, before we sign off for the year?
Well, just once again, we'd like to give a shout-out to Mike Goodpaster for bringing us on board to do this. Mike, we've really enjoyed it and enjoyed the opportunity. Jeff, thank you for, again, all the work you put in that give us a plan for every week for not only here on the Trogcast, but also the Xavier Razorcast. It's just been an enjoyable time, and I hope we'll be back next fall for the Musketeer and college basketball season so we can do it all again.
Yeah, and thank you, Jim. I mean, you can't do it without your insight. You're the real passionate NCAA men's basketball fan. I'm sort of more of a casual fan, so your insight is what makes the show. But we're happy to be able to do it together, and thanks to Mike and all the folks that are out there listening. Check out for us again in the fall. I hope that we get asked back. Before we just sign off here, a couple other things. There are 351 schools in the NCAA Division I, and that we mainly just talked about the men's. Jim, of course, mentioned Dawn Staley, South Carolina Lady Gamecocks, who won in Division I for the ladies, but there's also many, many other teams playing. Just in the NCAA alone, there's 320 teams in Division School, and we'd like to do a shout-out real quick. The men's champion this year was the Northwest Missouri State Bearcats. I believe that was their first championship ever. And on the women's side, it was the Ashland Eagles here in Ohio. And then on the largest division is actually Division III, which has over 450 schools. And the Babson Beavers pulled down the crown on the men's side. And for the women, it was the Amherst Mammoths. And that doesn't include like all the NAIA schools and the community college tournaments are out there. So lots of people playing college sports, and it goes well beyond the one and dones, as we've said before. And Jim, I think you'll be happy to know this last little tidbit that you spent all year informing people of the Fort Wayne Mastodons and all that they've done. And even though the basketball team didn't go as far as you wanted, I think you would like to know that in the NCAA mascot voting tournament, the Mastodons did reach the Final Four. They were one of the four top mascot names. Unfortunately, they did lose in the first round of the Final Four to the winning mascot, which was the Western Illinois Leathernecks. But your Mastodons did make it. And also, as mascots go, Amherst just started calling themselves the Mammoths by a vote, and that just kicked in this week. So keep us here for all the fun tidbits on basketball, and I'll let Jim have the last word there on the mascot, because I know how much he loves the Fort Wayne Mastodons. Yeah, and again, we thought they would be, that was my pick back in November to, make some noise, and they did early, but of course kind of faded away and didn't make that magical run in in March Madness here like I thought they might. But again, that's the fun we have, trying to figure out what's going to happen and then getting to sit back and watch what happens and then talk about it, which that's what, if we have skills, it's in talking about stuff. Not maybe all that important sometimes, but we can talk about it. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Have fun. Hope you're all talking about it, and we will see you in November. Thanks for listening.